once again, and welcome to Chapter 6 of Arizona Springtime. This one is titled Eyewitness to Solitude, and we'll jump right in. The author William Least Heatmoon, in his book Blue Highways, quixotically chose to travel along the secondary highways depicted as blue-colored routes in an American atlas. My map of choice was the yearly official Arizona road map published by Arizona Highways. On those color-coded maps, black was the color for secondary roads. Interesting places to visit on the map were colored a dark green. Those included national parks and monuments within Arizona. One dark green place on the map was Organ Pipe National Monument. A couple of years after graduating from university, we, Audrey and I, traveled there. The monument is located along the southern border of Arizona, opposite the Mexican state of Sonora. The monument is named for the organ pipe cactus. It was declared a monument in 1937 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt to preserve the Papago, Tohono O'odham, way of life, including their traditional harvest of the organ pipe cactus fruit and other desert fruits. A north-south state road bisects the monument. It was otherwise devoid of paved roads. Along that highway, north of the monument, we stopped at a small copper mining town of Ajo. The town was holding an annual mineral show, and we surreptitiously joined the locals. Ajoite, a rare and desirable copper ore mineral, was the local sensation. The specimens we saw were a rare sky blue with tiny veins of native copper. The specimens likely came from a pocket at the adjacent open pit copper mine. They were priced too high for our pockets, and we have been to countless shows since then and have never seen them after that show. Going south again, we bypassed the monument headquarters to land at Lukeville, or informally Gringo Pass, on the United States side of the border. With expressed intention, we crossed the border to Senita in Mexico. There's an old legend concerning the crossing that dated back to the Prohibition era in the United States. It was claimed that a tunnel passed between Gringo Pass and Senita, and a steady stream of alcohol was moved north through it. There were further claims that gangsters on the run traveled south in the tunnel, the most famous being Chicago mob leader Al Capone. Having grown up in the Chicago area, I know it is doubtful that he would have traveled so far away from the place he held court. Bribes went far in the corrupt noir South Side Cicero area. When we visited Senita, Mexico, the town had very little in the way of anything, including business. There was a liquor store, a saloon, and a place to buy required Mexican car insurance. We went expressly to buy Kahlua, a coffee-flavored liqueur. The caffeine and alcohol was an effective combination to keep one awake while imbibing. Returning to Lukeville, there was not much more to it than Senita. There was a convenience store for Americans going into Mexico. Their delectable specialty was machaca, a lightly seasoned, dried beef sold in plastic baggies. This particular machaca had an extraordinary taste and remains the best machaca we ever ate. We ate a little of it straight out of the bag, like jerky, when we headed back to the car. The natural world holds many deep time stories to add valuable perspective to a journey. Reading and research before or after a journey greatly enhances the experience. Knowledge expands the experience, and it seems less detached. Organ pipe is made up of mountain ranges that are, geologically speaking, a fault block type, i.e., pointed mountains rising steeply with low valleys between them. An example of that is the hike along a trail that led to an old stacked rock mining cabins adjacent to abandoned mines in the Puerto Blanco mountains. The light-colored Mesozoic era mountains are comprised mainly of metamorphic rock. But those rocks took a long and tortuous path to get to the state they are in today. Following an early period of volcanism, the early rocks were subsequently broken, fused, and twisted. As the mountains began to rise, the rocks were again put through the wringer. Finally, the basin and range was formed. But our Earth is never done with change. In the more current era, erosion is filling in the basins with debris. The fill began during the Pleistocene era, when the land was particularly subjected to precipitation. Now the soil contains gravel and sand. Because the soil drains quickly, cactus and other plants are generally not washed away during monsoon downpours. The landscape we saw before us was ancient in the making, but stunningly dramatic in the here and now. We checked in at the visitor center and were told the rules for backcountry camping. At the time, there were no alerts regarding safety or travel in the monument, and we were told that we could camp 1/4 mile away from a road. We never saw anyone else during the trip. There are 2 main roads inside the monument. Both of them are loops. Ajo Mountain Loop Road is about 21 miles long and one way only over most of the route. The unpaved road runs along the base of the rugged Ajo Mountains. Close-knit groups of organ pipe cactus were scattered judiciously both near and far. The organ pipe cactus is named for the pipe organ-like stems that grow in clusters of individual plants. The stems generally reach a height of 10 feet and a few pipes up to 15 feet. The number of pipes on a cactus is in the neighborhood of 15 to 20. Pipes are about 6 inches in width with little variety. I later determined that if, by some fantasy, a cactus pipe was to become part of a pipe organ, then an open-topped pipe 8 feet high would produce a sound 2 octaves below middle C, a note that is about as low as possible on an organ. Unlike the saguaro, which has a central trunk and attached arms, the organ pipe does not have a central trunk. It is well fortified with defensive spines, a desert habitation of leaves. We arrived too early in the year to see the flowers of the organ pipe cactus. The impressive flowers have pale, waxy white petals tinged with lilac edges, and are night bloomers awaiting pollination by bats. Although the organ pipe is among the dominant species, there were also saguaros in the monument. According to saguaro friends and scientists, the oldest saguaro recorded was 300 years old, nostalgically named Old Granddaddy. It lived out its life north of Organ Pipe National Monument in Saguaro National Park near Tucson. Another cactus frequenting the monument is the hedgehog, whose spines are menacingly long for its size compared to most cacti. The hedgehog adapted to produce an overkill of profuse spines in its defense from vegetarians. Often overlooked on the floor of the desert is brittlebush. Its yellow flowers can carpet a desert after a spring or summer rain. The plant was used in the early mission churches as incense, and its local name is incensio. One of my favorite cactus species is the generally petite Mammilaria, often nicknamed fishhook or pincushion. Mammilaria robustina is one of the species with profuse, long curved spines. It does not grow in large protective clusters like many cactus species. The Mammilaria is a lone wolf. They are often overlooked by quick-stepping hikers until they bloom. Their impressively large flowers, for their size, rise over the stem and open wide. At that point, the hiker can enjoy the display. Another main road in the monument is Puerto Blanco Drive, a long one-way sandy road next to the border with Mexico. The national border was a typical 3-strand barbed wire fence, the very kind used by cattlemen throughout the West. On the Mexico side, only 100 yards away, was Mexican Federal Highway 2. That route is a major thoroughfare that runs from Tijuana at the Pacific Ocean to Matamoros on the Gulf of Mexico. Transnational trucks and long-distance buses used the vital route. The buses we saw had modern darkened windows, gleaming chrome flanks with crisp white roofs. All the traffic breezed along at a high rate of speed. In contrast, we are in a white Japanese import, plodding along a thin washboard trail. While I drove through the deep sand of the road, I realized it also served as a wash. If there were a hard rain, the road would become impassable, but the sky was clear and bright. Off Puerto Blanco Drive, we stopped at Quitobaquito Spring, the life-giving spring just yards north of the Mexican border. Its meaning is a warped Spanish or Tohono O'odham translation that means either little springs or little cow. Father Eusebio Kino, the Jesuit priest who founded a series of mission churches in the mid to late 1600s, was likely the first European to visit the site in 1698. He named the site San Sergio. Originally along an ancient salt trail, it became a road named by the Spanish conquistadors as the Camino Real. Later still, the road became the Camino del Diablo, or Devil's Highway. How did the devil get involved? The area was and is very hot and dry during late spring, summer, and early autumn. Also, it was a dangerous road in a couple of aspects. The desert took no prisoners, and if one was caught without water, there were and are terrible consequences. Also in the 1860s, it was dangerous for another reason. Fugitive outlaws from California found the border to be perfect for raiding. They raided first one side, and they would rob, steal, and murder, then retreated to the other side of the border for protection from the law. After a while, they would raid again and disappear to the other side. During the territorial years, the spring became a strategic point to stop along the little-used early trails and rough roads between Ajo and Yuma. There were no maintained roads and no towns or settlements outside of Quitobaquito. Beyond Quitobaquito Spring, travelers could only hope that inconvenient but well-mapped tanks, deep carved holes in rocks, would retain enough water after rains. If the tanks were dry, pioneers were in a desperate situation. By the early 1900s, hundreds of people were estimated to have died along the route between Caborca, Mexico, and Yuma. At various times, the oasis was deepened and widened to expand the spring into a pond much as it is now. The spring's importance as an oasis was the difference between life and death. In the arid lands, a year-round heavy flow of spring water is rare. All springs could be claimed and became proprietary during early ranch land grabs. Without a spring or evident water source, a ranch did not last. Among the earliest of the European settlers at the spring was Andrew Dorsey, who ran a store during the 1860s. After Dorsey closed his store, Manny Levy opened his store. Levy was a Jewish settler originally from Texas. He opened his store for travelers and prospectors about 1888. He was joined by Jeff Milton, who set up a customs office there in the late 1880s. Milton later became famous as a true Wild West lawman. He had one arm that was shorter than the other, following a shootout with outlaws at a train station in Fairbank, Arizona in 1900. He was aboard a train that was being robbed by the Alvord Stiles gang. They became infamous because the leaders of the gang were not just outlaws, but lawmen themselves at the time. After Milton was shot guarding the money, he opted for a shortened arm rather than amputation. That resulted in a 3-inch gap in his left arm. Scientific explorer William Hornaday gave a dim description of the spring during the turn of the 20th century McDougall expedition. Quitobaquito was entirely depressing. It is one of the spots in which I would not like to die and would hate to live. Of its 8 houses, only 4 were inhabited, and the others were crumbling. The waters of the spring have made a pond, but it looks stagnant and unwholesome. There are trees growing about the place and a sprinkling of brush along the wreck of the spring, but the settlement is not inviting. Perhaps this is because the little hamlet is a hybrid neither Mexican nor American. The spring is American by about 100 feet, but the boundary runs right through the heart of the city. The spring irrigates one field, which is duly fenced against cattle and burros, but the waters of the Senita River are not utilized. Strange to say, we found that 2 Americans were living in that lonesome, stagnant, out-of-the-way place. One was our newest friend and companion in arms, Mr. Reuben Daniels, and the other was a Mr. Childs, who owns a very good cattle ranch, a fine well, and a steam pump on the trail to Gila Bend, 10 miles above the Ajo mines. Being curious to know why any American should settle there, I said to Daniels one day when there was a vacant interval, "Won't you tell me what turn of fortune led you to settle in a place so little and lonesome as Quitobaquito?" At first, Mr. Daniels was rather surprised by this unexpected question, but after a keen glance and a moment's pause, in which he evidently decided it was not put through any unfriendly intent, he replied very frankly, "Oh, I'm not staying down here because I'm stuck on the country. Like everybody else, I'm looking for an opening somewhere. But after all, there are much worse places for a man to live in." That was all he had to say on the subject, for he was at all times a man of few words.